Okay, Erev Tov, good evening, everyone. We are in a new location, or at least same location, but I guess different altitude. We're in the basement this week, Be'ezrat Hashem, because there's something going on. We are going to continue with Gemara Berachot. We last learned the Mishnah about the concept of a Baal Keri, and we learned a little bit about the Baal Keri, and then that extended to the different topics about thinking, about what Hirhur is, and then that led us to the discussion of what are you supposed to do if you come into the Bet Knesset and the Chazan is saying Nagdishach because you're late. Do you think about it? Do you not? That led us to that discussion. And then that led us into the discussion of what do you do if you're late? Can you start your Amidah? Well, it depends on how quickly you could finish. If you could finish by a certain point, as Machloka, one says you have to be done by Modim, so you could bow with everyone else. Another one says no, you have to be done by Yanak. We spoke about that at length. And then we talked about what happens if you hear Ameni Heshmer Rabbah during your Amidah, and we said you don't respond. So we spent a lot of time talking about what you're allowed to say during the Amidah, different times. I think I had mentioned that there was a chart, and Joey Kashima, like you had asked for me to send the chart in the chat. I got the chart, but I did not send it. I was actually trying to purchase copies of the chart, and at this moment, I'm remembering that the person never got back to me. But I would like to get what I think it's a huge chart, and I could show it to you guys later. Um, but yeah, it's in this massive chart of all the interruptions of different parts of tefillah, where you're up to, what you're allowed to respond to. We discussed maybe like 3 boxes out of something like 100 boxes, right? Just like specific cases. So I would like to see if I could get those charts, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we could even spend a shiur on it, just going through different topics. But let's continue. Baal Keri. What is a Baal Keri? As we had spoken about, a Baal Keri is one who had an emission, seminal emission, which could be, let's just say, generally a man had relations with his wife. Okay, so the law of the Baal Keri is that until he goes to the mikveh, he's not allowed to study Torah. So the next morning, presumably, he's with his wife at night. In the morning time, he has to go to the mikveh. Then he could pray. Then he could study Torah. Then he could study Torah. So now the question is, okay, what happens in the meantime if he has to pray? And specifically with Shema Yisrael, is he allowed to say it? Now, as I had mentioned, and we're going to get up to this, maybe not tonight, but we're going to get up to the halacha is not like this anymore. A person has relations; they are allowed to study Torah without going to the mikveh. This is called takanat Ezra. Ezra Sofer made this takana. Ezra Sofer made this takana that every time a person has an emission, then afterwards he has to go to the mikveh before he studies Torah. But the takana didn't last for whatever reason. Either it never actually took hold back then, or even if it did, people couldn't hold on to it afterwards, so it was abolished. Or maybe he never actually made the takana. We're going to discuss this, but essentially, for our purposes, the times of the Mishnah, we're going under the presumption that this takana exists, that a Baal Keri is not allowed to study Torah. What happens if he has to say Shema Yisrael? Does anyone remember? This was the Mishnah on Daf Chaf on the bottom. Very good. So it's machloket, okay? And I made a chart right now quickly. Let me show you the chart that I threw together. You guys could see the monitor. Everyone could see it. So the chart is as follows. There's a machloket between Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanakama says that he has to think the Shema Yisrael in his mind, which is what Andy you were saying. The Shema Yisrael itself you think in your mind, but the brachot of Shema you skip. That means not even thinking. You just skip it. And then brachot on food, bracha on food before you just skip, bracha on food after. He has to think in his mind. And what was the reason for this distinction? You guys remember? What was the reason for this? Very good. Very good. So that the distinction is Torah versus Rabbanan. Okay, so that's the reason. So things that are from the Torah, he thinks. Things that are from the rabbis, you don't even think. You skip. But Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, which I'll show you, it sounds like he says you just proceed as normal. You just say whatever you want. Say every thing. Say the Shema. Say the brachot. Say meaning according to Rabbi Yehuda, this practice of going to the mikveh after someone becomes a Baal Keri doesn't exist. He just disagrees with it altogether. And let's see the Mishnah of these two opinions. The Mishnah says here, this is the Mishnah on Daf Chaf Amud Bet. Baal Keri me'arher belibo ve'eno mevarech. A Baal Keri thinks about it in his heart, means in his mind, really. And he does not say the brachot, lo lefaneh v'lo la'achareh, not before, not after. You don't verbalize the brachot before or after. V'al hamazon, and for the food, mevarech la'acharav, he thinks in his heart afterwards, ve'eno mevarech lefanav, and nothing before. That's the Tanna Kama, the first opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, mevarech lifneim ul'acharem. You say brachot before and after. That means for food, you say before and after. That means for Shema, you say before and after. And if you're going to say for the brachot of Shema, of course you're going to say for Shema. Rabbi Yehuda says, the guy who was a Baal Keri says everything, right? So going back to the chart, it's pretty clear that Rabbi Yehuda does not hold that a Baal Keri ever has to go to the mikveh before he studies Torah. Okay? So yeah, the question is like, what does Rabbi Yehuda hold about that, about Takanat Ezra? So actually, when we're studying the Gemara right now, we're going to see that the Gemara is going to assume, putting Ezra Sofer aside, the Gemara is going to assume that there's actually a basis for this in the Torah, and that these two opinions are arguing on how to learn the psukim from the Torah. So we're going to say there's a source from the Torah, and they're arguing about the dispute of the source of the Torah. How they deal with Takanat Ezra, we're going to see that later on. Tosfot gives us a few answers. But for now, the fact that it's even Takanat Ezra, the Gemara is not even going to get into it. The Gemara is going to say, what's the source? Oh, what's his source? How come he doesn't learn his source? And that's how this discussion is going to start, okay? So what do we see from here? It's a machloket in our Mishnah, whether Baal Keri can verbalize the words of Torah. According to the Tanna Kama, no. And for Shema, he should recite it in his mind. According to Rabbi Yehuda, yes, Baal Keri is allowed to say Torah. Good? Yes. Yeah. The Takana was really about Torah. We're going to see the source is related to Torah. Okay? Let's go. Here we go. Fine. Now the Gemara, we are on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Bet. If you're looking in the art scroll, we are going to go to 21B-2. It's the very last line of the left column, so it's starting the second column. 21B-2 in the art scroll. Gemara, Masechet Berachot, Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Bet. Here we go. Rabbi Yehuda Omer mevarech lifnei ul'acharem. It quotes our Mishnah that tells us, Rabbi Yehuda says, you recite the brachot before and after, exactly as we just saw. Right? In the chart, it's quoting this case that Rabbi Yehuda says that he recites the actual bracha. Okay. L'meimar de kasava Rabbi Yehuda Baal Keri mutar b'divrei Torah. This implies that Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion, Rabbi Yehuda holds that a Baal Keri is allowed to recite Torah, right? Because he's saying, Baal Keri, you say everything, it's fine. There's no restrictions. You could say everything. V'ha'amar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, but we have a problem. What's the problem? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi asks us, what's the source that a Baal Keri should not recite Torah? Minayin, the Baal Keri she'asru b'divrei Torah. What's the source? Minayin is asking for a scriptural source. Shneimar, as the Torah says, V'hodatem levanecha v'levnei vanecha. You should teach your children. Usmich le yom asher amata. You should teach your children, and let's go ahead and see these psukim. Let me pull this up. I have it. This is talking about Moshe Rabbeinu in Sefer Devarim. It's talking about, don't forget the fact that you were at Ma'amad Har Sinai, as we just read this week in the parasha. Rak, Hisham elacha, v'shmor nafshecha me'od, pen tishkach et devarim asher rahu einecha. Be careful not to forget what you saw at Har Sinai. Ufen yasur milvavacha kol yemei chayecha. You're going to forget about all of the miracles that occurred. And you should teach them to your children and to your grandchildren. Tell your children what happened. The day that you were standing in front of God at Har Sinai, when Hashem told me to gather the people. At that time, you were all there. You all witnessed and experienced Har Sinai. So now what happens is, these words are vehodatem. You know what? Let's do this. Here, what did I want to do? This. Means you should tell your children. We're going to learn that this is like a way of saying you should teach your children. Teach your children Torah. So this right here is a reference to Torah. Okay. Sorry, I don't have a pen. But I'm using my finger. It's a little bit thicker, but it works. This is V'odatam Evanecha V'levei Vanecha is referring to the Torah. Yom Asher Amata Lefnei Adonai Elohecha Bechorev. This is talking about Har Sinai, right? So what's happening here is that you're making a connection between teaching and studying, verbalizing Torah, and Har Sinai. What do we know about Har Sinai before the episode of Har Sinai? What do we know from the Torah? Say it.
3 days. The Israel had to purify themselves for the receiving of the Torah.
Excellent. 3 days prior to the experience at Har Sinai, the Bnei Israel had to separate from their wives. Al Tikishul Isha, for 3 days they had to be separate, and they were not allowed to have relations. So this is going to be the connection. You see how you have over here, teach Torah. The next word is Har Sinai. So what that means is, you learn from here, this is the source, that when you want to teach Torah to your children and grandchildren, meaning in the future generations you're teaching Torah, you have to be just like Har Sinai. Just like at Har Sinai, someone who had an emission had to go purify himself, so too, someone who wants to study Torah now has to purify himself, okay? This, how do I...
I'm trying to decipher where Ezra got his source from.
There is no mention of Ezra right now. This is what Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is actually telling us that this is a source from the Torah. Now we know from the Gemara and Masechet Bava Kama that it's not from the Torah, which means that you have to ask, like, what are you even doing by telling me sources? Maybe what you're doing is you're finding sources that Ezra Sofer identified before he made his takana to say, like, yeah, there's some basis for this. But this for sure is not a clear source. Okay, this is not a clear source, and in fact, as I'm saying, the Gemara Masechet Bava Kama tells us that Ezra Sofer came up with this enactment without a source. So the very fact that you're even having this discussion is very interesting. But this is what we're doing now. What we're doing now is we're going to make some loose connections. I'm calling it loose, understanding that this isn't the only reason why this is the case. But what we're trying to do is say as follows. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Baal Keri, what can he say? Everything. Exactly. So from our Mishnah, Shema Berachot, which effectively is telling us he has no restrictions. Baal Keri could say everything. But Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, what's the source? He tells us this. Now let's continue. Ma lehalan ba'alei keryan asurin, just as there by Har Sinai, men who were Baal Keri were asur, being present at Har Sinai, meaning they had to purify themselves. Afkan ba'alei keryan asurim. So too, someone who's teaching his children and his grandchildren, someone who's teaching Torah, he's not allowed to be a Baal Keri, meaning a Baal Keri is asur b'Torah. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda ben who was it? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi tells us is the source. Now you might say, oh, okay. So now Rabbi Yehuda needs to get out of that. Because Rabbi Yehuda is telling us Baal Keri could study Torah. But Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi just taught us that look from where this pasuk ends, this pasuk begins, tells us Baal Keri is not allowed to study Torah. What is it called when you are going to learn a rule from two lines that are right next to each other? No and no. Although hekesh it might be, but it's not. There's a more specific term. It's not a gzera shava. Why is it not a gzera shava? Gzera shava is the same word in two places. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about completely different words, but right next to each other. It's called very good. It's called smuchin. So smuchin are things that are attached to each other. They're next to each other. They're samuch. They're next to. So you end one line, you start another line. Why was it placed like this? So that's the source. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is saying, look, it says, teach your kids Torah, like Har Sinai. Smuchin, you make a connection, you take the rule of what it was like at Har Sinai, and you apply it to all teaching Torah. Now, that's a source. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is saying it doesn't apply. How are you going to do that? I'll tell you how. You know what it is? Rabbi Yehuda does not learn smuchin. This is a tool that Rabbi Yehuda does not employ. He says, what are you talking about? One line is over, next line is starting. You can't run stop signs. The pasuk was finished. Don't compare this to that. That's what Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe you're going to tell me that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. The problem is that Rabbi Yosef tells us that that's not the case. Rabbi Yosef says a statement that afilu man de lo darish smuchin b'chol Torah, even the opinion that will not employ this rule of smuchin, that will not learn out from the placement of the psukim throughout the entire Torah, i.e., even Rabbi Yehuda, who does not learn out smuchin, but Mishneh Torah darish, he does by Sefer Devarim. And this is going to be the rule, that Rabbi Yehuda, throughout the first 4 books of the Torah, he is not doresh smuchin. He says you cannot learn something based on where this line is and that line is. You can't. But even he, the one that opposes smuchin, by Mishneh Torah, which is referring to the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, the 5th book of the Torah, he says we are Dorish Smuchin. So now here's what I'm going to need to do. I'm going to need to show you that Rabbi Yehuda rejects the concept of Smuchin by the Torah, first 4 books. The whole thing is the Torah, but by the first 4 books of the Torah. I need to show you an example of where he rejects the concept. And then I need to show you that that same Rabbi Yehuda uses that concept by Devarim. And this pasuk that we're reading, that is this, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is telling us is a source that a Baal Keri is not allowed to study Torah. Guess where it's from? Devarim. So you see, we have a source of why a Baal Keri can't study Torah. That source is from Devarim, and it's a Smuchin. And you might say, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't learn out Smuchin. We're going to say, hold on a second. You're right. He doesn't learn out Smuchin by the first 4 books of the Torah, but he does learn Smuchin by the 5th book of the Torah. And this is from the 5th book of the Torah, which means he's obligated to follow what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying, that Baal Keri is Asur in Limud Torah. So now what I need to do is I need to show you an example of where we see Rabbi Yehuda does not doresh smuchin. He does not do smuchin by the first 4 books, and then show you that he does, the same person does by the 5th book of the Torah. Okay, here we go. Yes, question?
Yeah. Why can't we just say, okay, he like agrees with the principle, but not in this scenario?
We can. We potentially can do that. We potentially can, but first we're taking a different approach, because, and I'll tell you why we're taking this approach, because the opinion of, if I were to ask you who is not doresh smuchin, who is that bold character that argues with everyone, it's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says, no, I don't buy smuchin. That's what he's known for. So here you have a case where Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is doresh smuchin, and you're going to say, oh, of course, because it's Rabbi Yehuda. Like, hold on a second. Rabbi Yehuda is only by the first 4 books of the Torah. So you have to consider this as a reason, because the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is that he's not Doresh Smuchin. So, and it's 4 out of 5 books that he doesn't. So 80% of the time, he would not be Doresh Smuchin if you just take a simple math. So let's see. How do you know? Or what's an example? What's an example that Rabbi Yehuda does not Doresh Smuchin? In the other parts of the Torah, in the first 4 books of the Torah, Ben Azai tells us, Mechashefa lo techayeh. Don't, okay, I pulled up the pasuk. So let me show you these 2 psukim. The first pasuk is, Mechashefa lo techayeh. You shall not allow a witch to live, which means a witch, a sorceress, gets the death penalty, but it doesn't tell us how. It doesn't say what form of death penalty she receives, or he receives. A witch or a sorcerer receives death, but it doesn't tell us which way. Okay? And the next line, it says, Kol shochev im behema mot yumat. When one lies with a beast, someone has intercourse with an animal, mot yumat, gets a death penalty. And we know from elsewhere that mot yumat refers to a form of death called stoning. It's a form of death called stoning. So what you have here is back-to-back lines. Line number A, line 1 says a witch or a sorcerer is put to death. Doesn't tell us how. Line 2 says bestiality, one who has intercourse with a beast, with an animal, receives stoning. It doesn't say those words explicitly, but mot yumat is referring to stoning. So here you have 2 lines, smuchin. First one says death. The next one says death by stoning. If you're a doresh smuchin, you would say the first person, which is this witch, gets death by stoning. So that's what Ben Azai says. Emar mechashefa lo techayeh, a witch, don't allow her to live. And in the next line it says kol shochevim behema mot yumat. When one lies and has intercourse with an animal, he gets a death penalty, which is referring to mot yumat. We know from elsewhere is referring to stoning. Smacho inyan lo. The Torah, says Ben Azai, put these 2 things, the placement of them, and juxtapose them together for a reason. Lomar, to teach you, ma shochev im behema b'skila, just as one who lies with a beast, with an animal, receives stoning, Af mechashefa nami biskila. So to the witch, the first case gets stoning. That's the opinion of Ben Azai. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda chimes in, and this is the Rabbi Yehuda we're talking about. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? V'chi mipnei shesmacho inyan lo. What, you're telling me because the lines are next to each other, notzi lazel l'skila, you're going to give the first one stoning? Because of the placement of the line? That's preposterous. Ela, that I agree with you about the rule that the witch will get stoning, but it's not because of the placement of the Torah. That's not a valid way of learning. It's for another reason. Why? There are two types of sorcerers. One is called an ov, one is called an idoni. Ov is someone who takes a bone and puts it in his mouth and the bone starts talking. The other one, idoni, is he takes a bone and he sticks it under his armpit or something like that. Honestly, I don't know. And I don't want to know because I don't want to be tempted. All right. I'm not, next time I see a bone somewhere, no, I'm not even gonna try to get into the details. But there's two types of sorcery. And those sorcerers, the Torah tells us explicitly they get stoned. They get stoning. Velami yatsu. And what Rabbi Yehuda is telling us is that they all fall under the same category of a sorcerer. So you have this rule of a sorcerer that says don't let them live, and then it gives you two specific examples of ov and idoni, which is a form of sorcery, and it says they get stoning. So he says ov idoni bichlal kol mechashefim hayu. These two forms of ov and idoni are examples, are just instances of the general rule of kishuf, of sorcery. So why is it said explicitly? Why is it said again? Lehakish lahem v'lomar to make a comparison and to teach you. Ma ov v'idoni b'skila, just as ov and idoni, those two specific instances of sorcery, just as those have stoning, av mechashefa b'skila. So too, the general practice of sorcery in all forms of it gets stoning. So Rabbi Yehuda says, I agree with you, Ben Azai. How do we know that a mechashefa, a sorceress, gets stoning? Well, Ben Azai says, because of smuchin. One line says, the sorcerer is put to death. The next line says, one who sleeps with an animal gets stoning. Smichut. This, next to this, you learn something from it. And then comes Rabbi Dan and says, no, you cannot learn something from smuchin, teaching you that you do not learn from smuchin. So what's your source? The source is when it says mechashefa lo techaya, and it says a sorceress is put to death. Later on, it gives you two examples of a sorceress, ov and idoni, and it tells us they get stoning. So he's saying that specific instance, when it tells you they get stoning, it's coming to teach you that all instances of kishuv get stoning, but do not learn smuchin. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So far, so good. Because why? Because go back to what Rabbi Shua ben Levi told us. Rabbi Shua ben Levi told us, what's the source that a Baal Keri is not allowed to study Torah? Very good. It says, teach your kids, remember Har Sinai. So there's a connection. Smuchin, right? And then Rabbi Yehuda comes and says, nah, I don't follow that rule. Well, maybe you're going to tell me he's not Doresh Smuchin. Rav Yosef told us that even Rabbi Yehuda, who does not hold of Smuchin by the first four books of the Torah, he does hold of Smuchin by Devarim. Now, how do I know he does not hold of Smuchin? From the witchcraft case. Because she told us by the sorceress, he says, you can't learn something out from Smuchin. Oh, but now, how do I know that he does learn it by Sefer Devarim? I need to find your source for that. And once I conclude that even Rabbi Yehuda is Doresh Smuchin, he learns Smuchin for Sefer Devarim, then it goes back to the case of why doesn't he hold that a Baal Keri is not allowed to study Torah? Because you have a Smuchin case, okay? So now that's the next thing we have to argue, is to understand a proof, an example of Rabbi Yehuda being Doresh Smuchin in Devarim. Yes, question? Okay, so Smuchin, the word Hekesh here is not telling you, it's a comparison. Okay, very good question. So Jared is saying, someone said the word Hekesh before. Who said it? I think Josh, you said it? Yeah, okay. So the truth is that we do call it Hekesh sometimes. So it's just in this case, we're being a little bit more precise. A Hekesh means a comparison. Now, if you learn Smuchin, if you learn that when you connect two things next to each other, like geography, if you will, because it's like written line after line that you're allowed to learn out, then you're making a comparison between these rules. The comparison of the rules is called a hekesh. You're making a comparison. So the smuchin tells you to make a hekesh. Okay? Now, in the case of the sorceress, there is another reason why you're making a hekesh. You're making a hekesh, you're making a comparison. Why? Because it's examples of. You have a general rule, a klal, that says sorcerers are not allowed, should not be allowed to live. And then you have specific instances of it. Of, Yidoni. And it says by those specific examples, the specific examples, it says they get stoning. So there's a hekesh, a comparison between these two specific examples and the general rule. But the word hekesh is a comparison. What is the reason for that comparison? It could either be smuchin, two psukim are next to each other, which I call the geography, or it could be the categories. You have a large category and a small category. These two psukim, the geography is not next to each other. The pasuk of the Oven Yidoni is nowhere near the case of the sorcerer. So you're not making a hekesh because of the smuchin, because of the geography. You're making it because it's a subset. So the rule of the individual of the instance applies to the entire general rule. There's a concept that's called klal uprat. When you have a general rule and you have a specific rule, you take the details of the specific and apply it to the general. We're teaching you a rule about the general by giving you an example. There's a general rule. Here's a specific case of that general case with a detail that's added. That detail is going to apply to everything because we're just giving you an example. So that's called a hekesh, a comparison. But the why are you making the comparison? Here you're making the comparison because it's a klal uprat. With the psukim, you're making a comparison because of a smichut or smuchin. Okay, good, very good question. Very good question.
So, Rabbi,
Yeah. Hey, Ron.
why make people go through the trouble of smochim and like zer shavas? Why not just say straight out like this is the punishment? Like,
Oh, okay. So you're asking a good question of like why do we have the concept of Torah Sheba al Peh? Why doesn't the Torah just list out all the rules? There's two answers to this. All right, so you guys get Ronnie's question. Excellent question. Ronnie's question is like, why leave things ambiguous? Why leave the Torah ambiguous? You don't know we don't know what the rule is, so now we're breaking our heads trying to figure out what the rules are. Just tell me the rule, right, Ronnie? That's your question.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay, good. So two answers. Answer number one, it's impossible. It's impossible to delineate every single detail. It's not possible. Look at the Constitution. The Constitution, you know how many court cases there are to try to understand what was the original intent of the Constitution? And then you have some people that don't care what the original intent was because they only care about their own intent, right? So it's like, forget about what the original intent was. Like, this is what I think. But if you're taking even a constitutional approach, what does the Constitution say? It's ambiguous. It's not clear. There is no book, even the Torah, that can be covering every single detail of everything. It's not possible. So even if more details would have been there, there would have been other questions. Okay, so that's like one practical answer. But a second answer is because the Torah was given to us in a specific method to maintain this relationship of Torah Shabbat Peh. When the Torah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah says you have to put on totafot. Now, to your point, Ronnie, why didn't you tell me what totafot are? I have no idea what totafot are. It doesn't tell me what it is, what it's made out of, what it looks like, what color it is, what shape it is, what is it, something that has compartments, what are in those compartments. It doesn't say. It says put on totafot between your eyes. And then put on something on your hand. That's what it says. And then Moshe Rabbeinu learns. When the Torah was given to Moshe, he was at Har Sinai for 40 days, and then he was at Har Sinai for another 40 days, and there was a whole journey in the desert. He was learning through Nevuah about the Torah Shebichtav. He then taught it to Yoshua, and he taught it to Pinchas Elazar, and he taught it to Pinchas, he taught it to Aaron HaKohen, he taught it to the Zekenim, he taught it to the all of the elders, and they taught it to the next generation, they taught it to the next generation, they taught it to the next generation, which is a critical component of our Torah, a critical component of our Mitzvah, of our tradition. So, to answer your question, Ronnie, of why didn't the Torah explicitly teach us, my first answer is because it's not possible to just go through every single detail of everything. It's not possible. But the second answer is even if it were possible, there is a concept of tradition, of Torah Sivalanu Moshe, Morasha Keilat Yaakov. It is a heritage to be passed on from generation to generation. And that's part of the built-in process. Maybe Hashem could have given us a book with more details. But that's not what he wanted. He wanted there to be that relationship, this misorah. It's not supposed to be that anyone who could pick up the Torah can just read it and say, "Oh, I know exactly what was in mind." No, this was given to Moshe. Moshe then taught it over. So that misorah, that tradition, is critical part of our tradition. Okay. So that's part of it. Like Moshe Rabbeinu would teach a law, and he would say, and this is the hint. This is where it's learned. This is the source that's in the Torah for it. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu would teach the people. Okay, let's go. So what are we up to in our flow? You get the flow. What's the flow? Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, Keri is allowed to read everything. Our Gemara says, hold on a second. Why is a Keri not allowed to read everything? Rabbi Ben Levi tells us a source. That source uses smuchin. So what does Rabbi Yehuda do with that source? And you might say, oh, I know Rabbi Yehuda has the opinion that is not Doresh smuchin. That is only by the first 4 books, not by the 5th book. So since by the 5th book he is Doresh Smuchin, what does he say about this? Okay, that's where we are in the flow. Now the piece of the flow is that we're going to prove that Rabbi Yehuda is Doresh Smuchin in Sefer Devarim, in the 5th book of the Torah. Let's see it. Share screen. Let's go. Let's go. Uve Mishneh Torah, and in the book of Devarim, Minalen Dedarish. How do we know that Rabbi Yehuda does indeed learn Smuchin? The Tanya, because we learned in the Braita. Ooh, okay. Let me show you the pasuk here so that you understand the flow here. Here it is. There, we don't need to go into all of the detail here, but the Torah tells us in line 28, this is set for Devarim, so it's important to know. And I'm going to explain to you why there would even be a difference between the first 4 books and the 5th book. Let's see this. A man finds a woman who is engaged, betrothed, a virgin woman, and he takes her and he rapes her. He grabs her and he has intercourse with her, and it's found out. So the man the raper, the rapist, is fined, and he needs to give 50 silver shekel, whatever value that is, to the father. And he needs to take on the responsibility of marrying her. Now you might say, like, okay, if she doesn't want that. Okay, if she doesn't want that, she doesn't want that. But what you're telling the man is that if you're going to go do something like this, you're going to be punished. Number 1, you're going to be fined. Number 2, you're going to have to marry her. And part of marriage means you're going to have to take care of her. Now, obviously, you think about that in a modern sense of like, why would any woman want this? Yeah, and I don't think any woman would want this. But what we're telling the man is, okay, you went and you did this and you defiled this woman. Now no one's going to want to marry her. She's not going to be able to have a man take care of her. She's not going to have a home. She's not going to have someone providing for her. She's not going to have kids. You did this to her. You're the one that is responsible. You have to marry her. Okay? Again, just put it aside because this is not something that so the world is different. But the Torah says is that once the man does this to a woman, he must marry her, and he's not allowed to divorce her. You're responsible for her. You have to take care of her. Next line. Okay, when we talk about next line, think in your mind, smuchin. Next line says, Lo yikach ish et eshet aviv. A man is not allowed to marry his dad's wife. Lo yigaleh kanaf aviv. He may not expose the clothing of his father, meaning a woman that his dad was with, he's not allowed to be with. Okay? We're not talking about the guy's mom. Dad goes, marries a woman. It's what you call a stepmom. Then all of a sudden, dad forgets about her. She's free. The kid liked her as a stepmom, and now he wants to be with her. Is he allowed to? Okay? Stepmom, he's not allowed to. Okay? The Torah is telling us here, Lo yikach ish et eshet aviv. A man is not allowed to marry that woman. Okay? The question is, what about if it's a situation where the man, the dad, raped a girl, and now she does not want to be with him? So now, no. Okay, that's a question. The question is, let's say the man was with her, never married. Is the son now allowed to say that I want to marry her? Is he allowed to? Okay, so we're gonna see the machloket. It says wife. Very good. But it says don't marry the wife of the dad. Don't expose the edge of his father's garment, which is a metaphor of saying the the person that was part of the dad's exposure, you should not expose. Someone that was with your dad, you cannot be with, which is not about marriage. It's about intercourse. Okay? So this is what it's going to come down to. It's going to come down to, do you learn smuchin or not? Okay? Because remember, the line right before had to do with the one that's anusat aviv, the one that the father raped. So there's something that you learn from the smuchin. So let's go ahead and see the Gemara with that background. Now that you saw it, let's see it. Okay, Mishneh Torah min Alan Darish. How do I know that in Sefer Devarim, Rabbi Yehuda does learn out smuchin the Tanya, because we learned in a Braita. Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Rabbi Eliezer was not Rabbi Yehuda. It's the first opinion. Rabbi Eliezer says, "Noseh Adam anusat aviv umufutat aviv." A man is allowed to marry the one who was raped by his dad, or the one who was seduced by his dad, which falls under the same category. Anusat beno umfutat beno. Similarly, one is allowed to marry the woman that his son was with, raped, anusa, or that his son was seduced. Okay, there's no issue with the father or the son being with the anusa or the mefuta. Fine. Rabbi Yehuda oser, but Rabbi Yehuda said oser ba'anusat aviv u'mefutat aviv. Rabbi Yehuda says it's a problem for the father. It's meaning the son is not allowed to be with his father's anusa, the one that the father raped or the father seduced. V'amar Rav Gidal amarav. Rav Gidal wants to know why. My tamad Rav Yehuda. What's the reason for Rav Yehuda? Here's why. Dichtiv lo yikach ish et eshet aviv. A man is not allowed to marry his father's wife, as Richard said. It says wife, but then it continues. V'lo yigale et kenaf aviv. He shall not uncover his father's cloak. I don't know why they translated it as skirt. He cannot is talking about corners, his jacket, his cloak, his robe. Kenaf shera'a aviv, a skirt that has been seen by his father, which means any woman who has had sexual relations with his father, lo yigale, he cannot uncover. Okay, I see why they did that. So they made it the kanaf, not the kanaf aviv. It's the kanaf of a woman that was exposed by aviv. Oh, okay, very interesting. I did not understand it that way. Wow, very interesting. Is that what the art scroll says?
Yeah.
They say it that way?
His father saw.
Well, it says the robe of his father.
It's the robe of the father.
It says over here the robe that his father saw.
Okay, which one?
The second line, you're right.
The last line in the second
The
paragraph.
Gemara says the robe that his father saw, but the actual pasuk says robe of his father.
Yeah. So the drasha is lo yigaleh et kenav aviv. He should not uncover the robe of his father. A son should not uncover the robe that his father saw. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Very good. So it's what they're doing. The drasha here, they're explaining this pasuk as kanaf aviv is the robe of a woman that the father had uncovered. Okay. So, but who said that it has to do with anusa? Who said that has to do with the case of a rape? It does not say that. It says a man should not marry his dad's wife, and not to be with the one that his dad uncovered. Okay, so it could be talking about the wife. So that's what the Gemara is going to say. How do you know that's referring to the case of anusa? Because look at the line that was right before it. The line right before it says, if you violated a woman, you have to pay her 50 shekel and you have to marry her and you're not allowed to leave her. So you see that Rabbi Yehuda says, what happens is you have a machloket. So going back to my original question, if you have an anusat aviv, is a man allowed to marry anusat aviv? Is a man allowed to marry a woman whom his father had violated? And the answer is machloket. Rabbi Eliezer says yes, you're allowed to. The restriction has to do with wife, as what Elon is saying. Rabbi Yehuda is saying no. You have doresh smuchin. The line right before it talks about rape. This case of violating the woman. This is that connection. You're going to learn that it applies to this obligation as well. That a man is not allowed to marry not just his dad's wife, but also his dad's the woman that he had seen, anyone that he had seen, anyone that he's been with, even just a one-time thing, which is, which is you see that Rabbi Yehuda is Doresh Smuchin. Now, any theories? Why would Rabbi Yehuda distinguish that he is not Doresh Smuchin in the first 4 books of the Torah, but he is Doresh Smuchin in the 5th book of the Torah? Why would he distinguish? And sorry.
Fifth one is like the book of laws.
Okay, okay. So you're correct that there's something unique about the fifth book. What? It's a summary. Very good. I think you guys are getting to the same point. It's a Mishneh Torah. Okay, very good. So you guys are saying you're saying how it's a repetition of some sort. What happens is as follows: the machloket in Masechet Gittin of how the Torah was given to us. One opinion says that the Torah was given to the Jewish people over the course of the 40-year journey. They would be given the next section of the Torah, then be given the next section of the Torah, then they'd be given the next section of the Torah. So Rabbi Yehuda is saying, how could you learn out something by what one line is next to the next line? You have no idea when what was given. It's possible this line was given 3 months afterwards. So were you connecting this to that? That's what Rabbi Yehuda is going to say. But Sefer Devarim, everyone agrees it was Moshe Rabbeinu's. He organized it at the end of his life. It was in the last couple of weeks of his life, and he put the entire book together through Nevuah, and he gave it as a Nevuah. He didn't give this over, and then a week later give this over. It's like exactly what you guys are saying. It was his summary. So when Moshe Rabbeinu is organizing things in his book in specific ways, there's a reason why he's putting exactly everything where he's putting. That's what Rabbi Yehuda tells us. Rabbi Yehuda says you cannot be Doresh Smuchin based on placement of where things are for the first 4 books. Because that's the order that God gave it to us, but it doesn't mean that it was given to the Jewish people at the same time. It could have been a break. It could have been out of order. But Moshe Rabbeinu's book was something that he organized. So the way he organizes it matters. The way he puts things, he puts a law here, right afterwards puts another law. There's some connection behind it. So, anyone want to venture to tell me the Shakla V'Tarya, which means the flow of the Gemara, where we're up to? Rabbi Yehuda, tell me. I said it a few times. What does Rabbi Yehuda say in the Mishnah? What does that imply his rule is? Right?
Does he say the Shema implies he doesn't learn Smuchim?
No, it doesn't imply that. But you're skipping some steps. But yeah, he says you're allowed to say Shema, which implies that there's no restriction of a Baal Keri. Okay? Now, what does the Gemara say? What's the source that a Baal Keri is not allowed to study Torah? From the Har Sinai Smuchin, which is in Sefer Devarim. That's Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. What does Rabbi Yehuda say about that? And if you're going to tell me he doesn't hold of Smuchim, but that's only by the first 4 books, and I prove it to you, and I know that he does hold Smuchim by the 5th book, because I just showed it to you. So what are we left with? He holds Smuchim by Sefer Devarim. Why does Rabbi Yehuda not hold of the rule of Baal Keri is not allowed to study Torah? Okay, you got where we're up to? The long-winded question. What?
Back to square one.
We're back to square one. Yeah, I could have told you that at the beginning. Here we go. Amri, the answer is in. You're right. You're right. B'Mishneh Torah Darish. He does learn Smuchin. He does. The source is a Smuchin from Devarim, and Rabbi Yehuda learns Smuchin in Devarim. V'hani Smuchin mibai leil idach. The Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. He just learned something else from the Smuchin. He agrees with the principle that you learn Smuchin, and he agrees that, look, you have one line that says teach Torah, and the next line says Har Sinai. So he agrees that there's a connection. His conclusion is different. Your conclusion is that means a Baal Keri is not allowed to study Torah. His conclusion is something else. Damar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi tells us, Kol hamelamed livno Torah, any time a person teaches his son Torah, ma'aleh alav hakatuv ki'ilu kibla mehar chorev. The Torah views it as though he is accepting and he is part of the transmission of Torah at Har Sinai. Why? Shneimar, as the pasuk says, "V'hodatem levanecha v'levnei vanecha." One line it says you should teach to your children and to your grandchildren. And the next line, Smuchin, Yom Asher amati lefi Adonai levecha bechorev. It's like the day that you stood in front of Hashem by Har Sinai, which means anytime you teach Torah to your children and to your grandchildren, you are partaking in Har Sinai. So yeah, what does he learn from it? He learns a concept. He's learning a concept of an element of when you're studying Torah, you should feel that you are reliving Har Sinai. So I learned Smuchin. From the Smuchin, I'm teaching you a mindset that you're supposed to have when you're studying Torah. Right now, we, right here, are studying Torah. We should have a mindset of, we are being Mekabel Torah from Har Sinai. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. So you're going to tell me, I thought you hold Smuchin by Devarim. He says, I do. So you have 2 Pesukim, Har Sinai and Torah together. Yes, I make a connection. When you study Torah, it should be as though you should view it as though you're at Har Sinai. That doesn't mean you have to go to the mikveh. That just means it comes with a sense of seriousness. You're not reading a newspaper. You're partaking in a revelation, a divine revelation. That's what he's saying. Okay, so very clever way of dealing with the issue. Just saying I agree with you, but I'm just gonna learn something else. Learn something else from that connection. So he agrees with Smuchin. He just disagrees with the conclusion that the Smuchin comes with.
Than the first version is talking about, yeah, it says Har Sinai, but then it goes back to when they said the 3 days they have to be clean. Like, that's not mirror.
Yeah. But that was what happened at Har Sinai. But yeah, you're right. You need another pasuk there to really to round out the drasha. Okay, very good. Very good. I want to tell you guys a trivia. So in the school, one thing that we do is on Fridays, sometimes we have the morot ask us parasha questions, and then Rariton and I will give answers. Sometimes we'll give the right answer, sometimes we give the wrong answers. And the kids have to sort of like sense it out. Like if they're saying the right answer, saying the wrong answer. Sometimes we get really clever that we both give like two parts of the correct answer. So we're both saying the right answer. And this past week, the question was, where did the Jewish people receive the Torah? Okay, and the answer was supposed to be Har Sinai. Okay, and I am just a little bit tricky with these kids, and I said Har Chorev, and everyone was like, "What is that?" So they're like, "No, he's wrong. Har Chorev." But then happens to be Gemara Masechet Berachot Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Bet, what we're studying right now, uses this pasuk. Look at this line. Ma'aleh alav hakatuv ki'ilu kibla har chorev. When someone studies Torah with his children and grandchildren, it's as though he is accepting the Torah from Har Chorev. Look at the commentary of the art scroll on this line. Does it say Har Chorev is referring to Har Sinai? Where is that? Which? Okay, footnote 28. Chorev is a synonym for Har Sinai. So the kid said, I said Har Chorev. They're like, no, he's wrong. I'm like, I'm right, Har Chorev. But I'm telling you that I tricked you, and it's really Har Sinai. It's just Har Sinai is given another name of Har Chorev. It's just the luck of the kids that I happened to be learning this last week, and I just wanted to. But yeah, I confused them. But that's okay. That's the whole point. The whole point is for them to like, is he right? Is he wrong? That's the whole point. It's fun. We're having fun. Okay, very good. Oh, what time is it? Okay, all right. Here we go. We are about to enter a very long flow. I think we should start it and let's see how far we can get. I might be able to finish it, maybe not. All right. Here we go. So far, if I were to ask you, what is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? Tell me. What is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda?
You can say all the brachot of no restrictions for brachot.
Very good. General. No restrictions for Keri. Keri can do all his azad, as you will. He's allowed to study all the Torah. Now, what we're gonna see is like the Gemara is now going to try to say, like, hold on a second, does he really hold that extreme that you could do anything? I think we're gonna try to. So the Gemara is gonna try to like temper the extent to which he says this. Like, no, he doesn't say it always. He's saying it in specific cases. So that's what we're going to do with the next couple lines of the Gemara. We're trying to reel in review that. Come on, review that. You're not saying like fully go do everything. That's what we're going to do. But before we do that, let me ask you a question, okay? Let's say you have two types of tum'ah. There's this one type of tum'ah, it's called Bal Keri. Okay, that's what we're talking about as an omission. That a person has to go to the mikveh before he studies Torah. Fine. But then there's another type of tum'ah that's more severe. One of example is called a zav. A zav is when a man has a irregular, unnatural emission, and if he has two in a row, like either two in the same day or back-to-back days, this man is called. It's not that he had relations twice. It's that there's some irregular flow happening that's almost spontaneous. Something's going on. He has some sort of a sickness. It's like some sort of a sickness of some sort of a disease or something. It's called zav. The rule is that for 7 days he needs to wait and he has to count clean days. He has to make sure that for 7 days he doesn't have it anymore, and then he goes to the mikveh and he's pure. Just like what you would imagine, like for a lady nowadays with an nidah, has to count 7 clean days. Same concept, okay? So let me ask you this question. Let's say there's a guy who is a zav, which means he needs to count 7 days and then go to the mikveh. And then in the middle, let's say after the first day of his clean days, he went with his wife. So now he became a Baal Keri. But he has this more severe tum'ah on him of Zav, which is going to require him to go to the mikveh after 7 days anyway. Does he have to go to the mikveh now? In day 2, he wants to say Shema. He wants to study Torah. So what we're saying is that this rule is that a Baal Keri is not allowed to study Torah. But if he goes to the mikveh, it's not even going to be complete because he's got to come back in a few more days, right? Because he's a Zav. You get it? I'm trying to think about how to call this. I'm going to call this like a double-decker tumah. A guy is or okay, let's talk about another case. Okay? A woman. Can a woman be a Baal Keri? No, because she doesn't have a seminal emission. However, if a man is with a woman, and then a day later, she is what's called poletet shichvat zera, which means she emits some semen. Let's say there was some that left was remaining in her, and she emits some. The next day, all of a sudden, she sees that she had some semen pop out. That is called a poletet shichvat zera, and guess what? She has the status of a Baal Keri. Just as a man who had a seminal emission is a Baal Keri, a woman who had relations and emits semen also is considered the same status, and she also needs to go to the mikveh before she studies Torah. This is a rule. The rule of Baal Keri applies equally to both men and women. Wow. Well, if it's going to apply to a man, it's going to apply to a woman also. It's the same. It's the same semen emission from the. It starts from the man, but then it ends with the woman. Okay, fine. So here's the question: a woman is a nidah. She has to wait 7 days, then go to the mikveh. Now, while she's waiting, she had a seminal emission, not because they had relations, but because the poletet shichvat zera could go up to 3 days later. There could still be some semen left in the woman and be emitted 3 days. This is not a PG rated class, by the way. So I'm going to tell your kids not to watch this one, Andy. But okay, so so now she's a nidah, and then after she's a nidah, she's poletet shichvat zera. She emits some semen. So now it's on day 2. She can't go to the mikveh for her nidah. She needs to wait full 7 days. But she also has this Baal Keri status. So she has this double-decker tumah. She's Baal Keri with something more severe. Something that's going to require her to count 7 days. Or Baal Keri and a Zav that's going to require him to count 7 days. Should they go to the mikveh in the interim? Even though it's not going to be fully effective. Should they go? What do you think?
Virtually effective?
That's the question. There's no point. Why?
Have to wait for that.
You're not becoming pure afterwards. So, do you say that by going to the mikveh, you will be partially purified from the tumat keri? So this way, at least you could study Torah.
Take your impurity from 100 to 50, or just say forget it, doesn't get.
Or do you say like you're tameh anyway? You have to wait it out a week anyway. So for 1 week, you don't say Shema, you don't study Torah. That's what happens.
Are there degrees of tumah?
Oh, there definitely are degrees of tumah, but the question is does going to the mikveh
But the
work for
the man, but then covers it like, but then
Richard?
You study Torah while you're in Yehuda.
exactly.
Can you study Torah when you're in Nidah? Yes. Can you study Torah while you're a Zav? Yes. It's a very good question. The restriction of studying Torah only applies to Baal Keri, but not to a Zav and not to a Nidah. Very good. So Richard's saying, maybe there should be argument for partial, as what Gav is saying. Go to the mikveh, at the very least, at least you could study Torah from days 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and then you go to the mikveh, and then you could do other things that you weren't able to do from the Zav. You're not allowed to go to the Beit HaMikdash, you're not allowed to eat certain things of Hekdesh, there's certain things that you're not allowed to do from being a Zav or a Nidah. You're not allowed to be with your spouse, okay? But a Baal Keri is allowed to be with his spouse, a Nidah is not. So there's like 2 separate things here. So can you say that, or do you say that we do know that this larger tumah that has a 7-day requirement is all-consuming, and for a mikveh to work, it's got to work. Maybe you could argue that for a mikveh to work, you got to come out clear. If you're not coming out clear, there's no partial mikveh. It doesn't work like that. Which one is it? It's a good question. Okay, what did you think? What were you saying?
I was gonna ask that question.
Very good.
Which from that question, I would think that you could partially.
Right. You might as well. You might as well go to the mikveh so that you could cover some of it, so you could study Torah.
I think it's a mitzvah levatala. It's like going to waste.
Right. You're not even doing a full complete.
Nothing. You just wasted the whole process of this mikveh.
Someone give me
You
okay.
contaminated the mikveh.
Yeah. Very good. There's gotta be some example. Someone give me like let's think of a mashal. A guy is sick. A guy is sick from COVID and the flu. I don't know if that works.
You get charged with robbery and murder at the same time.
Well, okay.
You repent for the robbery, you're still in jail for the murder.
Yeah, okay, that's a good idea. Actually, there are halachot about this.
6 years for robbery. and
Yeah, that's
life
what they do.
prison.
People get like 80 life sentences. I never understood why, but yeah. Okay, all right. We got to think about it. Anyway, for now, I'm just calling this the double decker tuma. There is. We didn't even start the question. Okay, we were just talking about it inside. Let's go. It's 9:30. We have a few minutes. Let's do it. Sometimes it's helpful to just talk about it outside. Tanan, we learned in a Mishnah. So we know what the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is. At this point, we think Rabbi Yehuda has no restrictions for a Baal Keri. Tanan, we learned in a Mishnah. Zav Shira'a Keri. This is a Zav, which I described is the man who had this irregular flow, two of them, that he now needs to count 7 clean days. That's the Zav. Ra'a Keri. This guy now became a Baal Keri. Venida Shepalta Shichvat Zera. Or it is a woman who is on her period, and then she then emits some semen from afterwards. The Zar Chachamim tell us it can last for up to 3 days. And Hamshameshet V'ra'ata Dam, or the same concept but opposite order. A woman had relations with a man, so she has the status of Baal Keri, and before she could go to the mikveh, she became a nida. So let's say she was planning on going. Right? She had relations on Wednesday night. Then Thursday morning, she was saying, "Oh, I'm going to go right now." Then all of a sudden, she sees that she's a nida. So again, she's a Baal Keri, and she didn't have the chance until the nida started. So can this woman go to the mikveh, or she's got to wait for her 7 days of nida? These cases, tzrichin tevila. The first opinion of this Mishnah tells us they need to go to the mikveh. Why? As what Richard said, that there's a separate takana on a Baal Keri. A Baal Keri has to go. That has nothing to do with, it's in parallel with the Zav or Nida. Zav and Nida has to go for one reason, Baal Keri has to go for another reason. A person is a Baal Keri, have to go to the mikveh. Rabbi Yehuda poter. And Rabbi Yehuda comes and says, no, you don't need to go. Okay? Yeah, this Rabbi Yehuda really didn't like the mikveh. No matter what, he's like, no, you don't need to. But now here's the question. Up until now, what did I say was the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? A Baal Keri? No restrictions, meaning does a Baal Keri have to go to the mikveh? No. Now here we have this interesting case of a double-decker tuma, and Rabbi Yehuda says, you don't need to go. Okay, now hold on a second. Rabbi Yehuda, you never say you have to go, right? That's what we said, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, up until now, we thought that Rabbi Yehuda says a Baal Keri never has to go. There's no restrictions. He doesn't have to go. And now you're going to tell me about a specific case of if it's a Zav and the Baal Keri, so in that case, you don't need to go, which seems to imply, but if he weren't a Zav, he were only a Baal Keri, he should go. It's just that he shouldn't go here because there's two, it's double-decker tuma.
Does it actually say don't go to the mikveh or Baal Keri? It just says you don't have to say the brachot, or you can eat. It doesn't necessarily say you don't have to go to the mikveh. It just says you can.
He says go. He says you say the brachot.
Say that.
Yeah, remember? You don't have to go at all. Look at the chart. Recites verbally. The guy is a Baal Keri.
It's implied that he's saying you don't have to go.
Yeah, because why does he have to go? He's saying say Shema, say brachot, say everything, say everything. You don't need to go. That's what it's implying. Correct. The implication is that you don't need to go. And now you come in our case and you say, I have a very interesting case of a Zav that is a Baal Keri, or a Nida that all of a sudden is a Baal Keri, is a Polat Shichvat Zera. So Rabbi Yehuda says, you have to go. You have to go for the mikveh. You have to go for a Baal Keri. You have to go. And then Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you don't have to go. So do we have an implication here? Do we have room to make an inference by saying Rabbi Yehuda is saying you don't need to go because there is a larger looming tumah and you can't do a partial mikveh? Is that what he's saying? Because if that's the case, then that would imply that if he were only a Baal Keri, he needs to go. So how does that work with our understanding of Rabbi Yehuda up until now? Good?
Seeing it as opposite, seems like this one is a more strict one. So he's saying even in this case, where it's the double decker, he doesn't have to.
Very good. So Gabriel is saying, like, no, like he's just consistent. He's just consistent with his opinion. He says Balkari doesn't need to go. Now you have this case of a Zav and a Balkari, and Rabbi Eliezer says you have to go. He says you don't need to go. You never need to go. You don't have to go at all. So that could be a way of saying it. But the thing is then why would he talk about it in this case? So you might say, you're right. It didn't have to be this case. For him, it could just be a regular Balkari. But there's an issue with that approach, logically. So let's go ahead. We see the Braita. There's three cases. I want to just clarify what are the three cases. Case number one is a Zav who subsequently became a Balkari. You guys know what that is? A Zav is the irregular. Subsequently, we had a seminal emission. Normal. Then you have a Nida, is a woman who is on her period. And then subsequently, she emit semen. How is that possible? From relations that she had prior to, and a little bit came out afterwards. And the third case is Hamshameshet, a woman who had relations, meaning the status of a Balkari came first, Dam, and subsequently she became Nida. So the difference between case 2 and case 3 is case 2 is Nida that had Poletet Shichadzera that like came, let's say, a day later. And case 3 is like, no, she first had relations and she had the Poletet Shichadzera, she had that emission, and then she became Nida. And that order is going to matter. That order is important, which is why I'm clarifying. Yeah.
Second instance that she's having intercourse even though she's Nida?
No, we're not saying, okay, very good. When she is poleted, when she's emitting semen after she's nida, it's not because she had intercourse now. It's because that the emission can happen up to 3 days afterwards. So it's that she had relations, she became nida, and after the onset of her menstrual flow, now she had the poleted shichadzer.
In the third scenario, she had intercourse. She's a Balkari.
Yes.
Then all of a sudden she started having
Exactly. By the way, this could happen if, let's say, the woman is lying down, so she didn't get up, so there was no emission, but all of a sudden she had her flow, and then after her flow, then she had an emission. These things could happen. Okay? Interesting science. Anyone know the viability, or I think that's the word, of how long semen can last? Up to 3 days. Yeah, so there's, I guess, it's a difference of opinion. Some say that it's only 3 or not. Maybe 3 days is long. Maybe it's less than that. But it's about what Chachamim tell us is that it's 3 days.
Wow.
It's 3 days that the semen.
The one mentions it. That's why we waited 3 days.
Yeah. Exactly. That's why you had Shloshet Yamim not to be with each other, because the semen is still like quote unquote viable or alive for up to 3 days. After that, it's just like water. It's nothing left. Yeah.
Third scenario seems pointless if you have like a window.
Oof. Okay, very good, Richard. Tell it to me again. The third scenario seems pointless. Explain.
Like a couple decker, like you did one thing, there was some time in between, and then you experience.
So this woman became a Balkari, and she had to have gone, and she didn't go, and then she became a Nida. Okay? So let's think about this. For Rebbe Eliezer, who says that the double decker has to go, what's the bigger chidush, if you will? Like, which case is more of a stretch? Which case is more obvious? Okay, is the case where she became a nida first and then poleta chichadzera a bigger deal? That Rabbi Eliezer says you have to go, or the case that she first had the emission or she had relations and then afterwards became nida? You know what I'm trying to say? Maybe I'm not articulating this.
Really getting rid of a month, but when you had force and you had this time between before Nida, you technically could get rid of the voluntary status.
Okay, very good. So let me say it like this. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer is gonna come here. Rabbi Eliezer is gonna say like, look, you became a zav. After you became a zav, you became a balkari. You're gonna have to go to the mikveh. He's like, what do you have to go to the mikveh? I'm in the middle of counting for my zav right now. He's like, I don't care. I know you started, but something new happened. You have to go to the mikveh for the zav. A woman is a nida. A woman started her nida. She can't go to the mikveh on day 2. She can't. She has to wait 7 days. She can't go to the mikveh. Now she's poletet shichadzera. She emits something, and now Rabbi Eliezer says you have to go. A second ago, like I wasn't you wouldn't have told me to go to the mikveh, but now this happened, you're going to require me to go. Okay? So the requirement of Bal Keri, of an emission, never really even fully went on this woman because she was a nida when it started. Now, what's the third case? The third case is she had relations. She became a Bal Keri, if you will. She had the poletet shichlat zera. She had the emission, so she has to go. Everyone, Rabbi Eliezer says he has to go. Then tomorrow she became a nida, and then he says, yeah, you have to go. Well, that case makes more sense because there was a point in which like you had to go. You get it? The case where she started off as a nida, I see why maybe you would say like you don't need to go because like you're in the middle of a different status. There was never an opportunity for you to go in that middle case. But the third case, she first was mishameshet, she first had relations, so she should go. And then she became a nida. Rabbi Lezer could say, look, you are
No close though, like the first scenario. So what?
correct. Well, Rabbi Yehuda is going to say I view all these cases the same. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, why do you need to teach cases 2 and 3? If you teach me case 2, you know case 3. Because according to Rabbi Eliezer, it says case 2, the woman is a nida, and then afterwards she emits, so she has to go. Then, of course, in a case 3, where she emits first, she has to go. Because like that, she has to go. She's emits, she has to go. And then after she becomes a nida, of course she has to go. So this is what the Gemara is going to try to get at. I feel that like we're going to do it now, and then next time we're going to start with the Mishnah again. So let's just see the question to give us a running flow, and B'ezras Hashem we'll do it again next time. So first, Rabbi Yehuda comes in and says in this double-decker case, she doesn't need to go to the mikveh. So now the Gemara wants to take this implication and say, Ad kan lo patar Rabbi Yehuda ela bezav shira'a Keri. Rabbi Yehuda says he doesn't need to go in the mikveh because it's a double-decker case. Because he's a zav and then became a bal Keri, so you don't need to go. Because before the bal Keri, before the emission, he's not someone that could go to the mikveh yet. He needs to count 7 days. So since before the emission he wasn't able to go to the mikveh, then even after the emission, Rabbi Yehuda says you don't need to go. But if it wasn't a zav, if he was just a regular bal Keri, a bal Keri greda, if he were just a bal Keri without a zav, mechayev. That's the implication. Remember, the case of this Mishnah is the double decker. You have a zav, afterwards come bal Keri, and Rabbi Yehuda says no, he doesn't have to go in this case. He doesn't have to go in this case. But if he was just a regular bal Keri, he would have to go. So that's what you want to say that I learned from this Mishnah, right? Oh, yeah. The implication is if it's a zav, and then he becomes a bal Keri, Rabbi Yehuda says you don't have to go because you have to wait until you finish your zav to go. At the end of the zav, you have to go, but you don't have to go for the bal Keri. But if you were in a zav, then you would have to go for the bal Keri. He's waiving, Rabbi Yehuda is waiving the mikveh requirement for a bal Keri because he has the requirement of a zav. That's what the implication is. But if there were no requirement of a zav, if he was just a bal Keri, he would have to go. That's what the Gemara wants to say. Aval bal Keri greda mechayav. If he was just someone who experienced just a bal Keri, then Rabbi Yehuda would require him to go. I was asking what you guys think. So you guys came to this conclusion of
They're basically saying, no, Rav Yehuda does require you to go to the mikveh because we see it from this, whatever it is, a Braita or whatever.
it's a Mishnah. Very good. Because what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says, a zav, shara bal Keri. Rabbi Eliezer says he has to go to the mikveh for the bal Keri aspect. Rabbi Eliezer says he doesn't have to go to the mikveh for the bal Keri aspect. It's because he's a zav and a bal Keri that he doesn't have to go for the mikveh for the bal Keri. But if he were just a bal Keri, he was not. It wasn't a double decker. It was a single decker bal Keri. He has to go. That's what you want to say. And maybe you're going to say like Gabriel and say no, Rabbi Yehuda just doesn't require it at all. And you might want to tell me that no, Rabbi Yehuda is consistent. That even if he's just a bal Keri, now you pater Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda would say that even that guy who's just a bal Keri is patur. Then why is Rabbi Yehuda commenting on the double-decker case? If Rabbi Yehuda says that you don't have to go to the mikveh ever for a bal Keri, so why talk about it in a case that it's a zav that became a Keri? Just say a bal Keri doesn't have to go. So maybe you're going to tell me the fact that he's commenting on this case, It's really to teach you that the rabbis are saying, the one that he's arguing with is saying that a Zav Shira Bal Keri needs to go. Look, when you have a dispute, there's two sides of the dispute. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, I didn't need to teach this case. So why are you commenting on this case? The other rabbi wanted to talk about this case. The first rabbi wanted to say that a Zav that sees a Bal Keri has to go. Of course, a regular Bal Keri has to go. And then even a Zav that saw Bal Keri needs to go to the mikveh. And I come and argue and I say, you never have to go. That could be one way of explaining it. But Ema Sefa. But if that's the case, Hamshameshet Vera'at Adam, Srichat Tevilah, that third case doesn't fit well. Why? Going back to this discussion that Richard was distinguishing between the order. If a woman became a nida and then was polatet shichot zera, or first she was mishameshet, meaning she had relations, and she then had the emission, and then afterwards became a nida. According to Rabbi Eliezer, that first opinion, he requires it in both cases. So why do you even teach me that? Leman katanile, why did you need to teach me this extra case? If you're going to tell me it's for the rabbi's purpose that we taught the third case, pshita, it's obvious. Why? Because hashta, uma zav shira'a keri, dimi'ikar elav bar tevilahu, a case of a zav, then subsequently became a bal keri. Initially, he was not someone that could go to the mikveh. He became a zav. He's not someone to go to the mikveh. If you ask the zav after day one, can you go to the mikveh? The answer is no. Now he saw bal keri, and Rabbi says, go to the mikveh. Okay, Demiikara lavber tivilahu. Initially, he was not someone who could go to the mikveh. Mechayev Rabbanan, but the rabbi says you have to go. So the rabbi say, zav after day one, no, you can't go yet. Oh, you had bal keri, go. Okay, so if the rabbis are going to tell you that you should go if you get the bal keri second, hamshameshet v'rat adam. If the woman was a bal keri first, she had relations first and had the emission first, and then subsequently saw the nida. Demiikara bat tivilahi, because before she became a nidah, she should have gone to the mikveh. She had a window of opportunity to go that she just didn't go. Look, again, of course she would have to go. And alav derabidahi. So the fact that you taught me case 3, it can't be that we're teaching case 3, this example for the Rabbanan, because there's nothing extra being taught there. Case 1, case 2, then you have case 3. It's like a smaller deal. Because in case 2, he says if she started off as a nidah and then had the poletet shichat zera, she has to go. Then of course she has to go if she had the poletet first. So that third case is not there for the rabbis. The case is not there for the rabbis. So the case must be there for Rabbi Yehuda. Oh, now if you're going to tell me that third case is there for Rabbi Yehuda, then these cases matter for Rabbi Yehuda. There's a case was taught for him. Elalav Rabbi Yehudahi. And Rabbi Yehuda is teaching you something specific about this case. Mishameshet v'ra'ata nida, a woman who had relations and then saw blood and then got her period, that's the woman that doesn't require tivilah. But if a man is just a bal keri, he would have to go. Okay, so what we're saying now is we're questioning our entire our perspective of what the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is. Well, up until now, we've been thinking that Rabbi Yehuda says a bal keri does not need to go. But now what we're saying is Rabbi Yehuda is commenting on very specific cases. There's a reason why he's commenting on a specific case. He's commenting on this specific case because it's that specific case that the bal keri doesn't need to go. But a general case where it's not a double decker, he would have to go. So this is going to be that you have our implication of our Mishnah and the implication of this second Mishnah are at odds. So what the Gemara is now going to do is going to give ways to try to work this out. I could keep going. You know what? Let me just tell you one. I don't know what to do. There's one line. I'm just going to read to you one line and then leave you on a cliffhanger. So the Gemara is going to say, Lo tema mevarech ela meharher. You're right. I take it back. Well, you know, initially I said that Rabbi Yehuda said, you can say it. I was wrong. Lo tema mevarech. You can't say it. Ela meharher. You could only think it. So what that means is, go back to this chart. At this point, the Gemara is going to do this. No, don't recite it verbally. Think in his mind, and I'm going to try to give you guys a strike through. You think I could do it? Control 1, I think. Yeah. Strike through. Saw that? This is what the Gemara at this point is doing. The Gemara is saying is lo tema mevarech. It's not that he should say it. It's just meharher. He should think it in his mind. The Gemara wants to do that at this point. Oh, what is Rabbi Yehuda arguing about? Rabbi Yehuda is saying you're allowed to think the Berachot also. Tanakama is saying only think the Shema but skip the Berachot. And Rabbi Yehuda says no, think the Shema, I agree. But you could also think the Berachot. But Rabbi Yehuda does not allow you to verbalize. Why? Because I have to work this out with this other Braita, the double-decker case. And the fact is, Rabbi Yehuda comes and says, in the case of a double-decker, Baal Keri doesn't have to go. Which implies that if it's just a single-decker, if it's just a Baal Keri, he doesn't need to go. And he might say, maybe not, but you're going to say, yeah, it does. So if that's the case, then Rabbi Yehuda would hold that a Baal Keri Greda alone needs to go. How does that work with our Braita? Let me change it. What's the Gemara going to do in the next line? The Gemara is going to say, you strike that strike through. I want that back. You don't just strike an answer like that. And the Gemara is going to go back and say, no, he says that you're allowed to say it. So how does it work? So we're in the middle of a flow. We have to pause here. But next time we'll start from this double-decker Mishnah and we'll give us a running flow. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, we are splitting hairs. This is one of those Gemarot that it's like, and then at the end it's going to say like, no, none of this applies. Right? Like that's what's going to happen at the end. But this is, we're learning Torah. We're learning Torah. Okay, Zak Baruch, everyone. Have a good night.
Hey, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Sorry, could you mind explaining the difference between a Baal Keri and a Zav again? I'm a little.
Yes. A Baal Keri is good night. Baal Keri is a natural emission that when a man has relation with his wife, he has an emission. A Baal Keri is just having a seminal emission. Normal. A Zav is something that we don't have nowadays. It's some form of a sickness that the man is having a flow without having relations. It's happening. No, it's not that. It's a unnatural flow that is, let's say, some sort of a disease. Okay, just for argument's sake. So it's not a regular seminal emission. It's something else. And if he has two of those in 2 days, he becomes tameh and he needs to wait 7. He has to count 7 clean days.
Okay. All right,
Have a great